Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Thank you for tuning in today. Coming up a little bit later on this morning at 9:35, we've got Matt Makoviak on the show. Later on, we'll also get into some Lubbock County news, possibly a bond election, and a lot more to get into regarding the shutdown and everything else going on in Washington, D.C. Joining me on the phones right now, the senior senator for the great state of Texas, U.S. Senator John Cornyn. Senator Cornyn, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, I guess we'll start with the topic that everybody is talking about. We are in day number 25 now of the partial government shutdown. From where you sit and the conversations that you have had, are we seeing any movement at all to get this thing wrapped up and to get the government reopened?
Next to none, Chad. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, I think, are being held back, so to speak, by their political constituency that's become more radical than ever after this midterm election. And they don't want to do anything that will be perceived as giving President Trump a win on anything, even though what he's advocating for is border security funds, which we desperately need. And so this is really, to my mind, a contrived shutdown. This is not a product of good faith negotiation, because if we got all the principals in the room and they actually were sincere about their desire to negotiate a compromise, they could do it in 30 minutes.
I was about to ask, is there any type of negotiation at all going on between at least the leaders, between Nancy Pelosi and the president?
Not that I know of. I was with the president. Senator Cruz and I flew down to McAllen with the president last week on Thursday, and it's clear to me that the president's willing to negotiate. As we all know, border security entails a combination of three things: the physical barriers at hard-to-control locations. That's what the Border Patrol tells us they need at certain hard-to-control locations. But it's also a matter of technology and personnel. We need to get the Border Patrol up to full staffing, because once somebody comes over the wall, you got to have somebody there to detain them. And we also need to enhance our technology at our ports of entry, where a lot of the high-value drugs like heroin and methamphetamine come in. So the president's willing to deal, I think, within that framework. But so far, it's radio silence by Nancy Pelosi. I think she thinks she's winning this battle.
So who is winning the battle? Because you look at public opinion polls, they're not great. Public opinion polls don't necessarily blame Republicans, but they do blame the president and they do blame the Democrats. So how does the message get out there that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are the ones who are holding this whole thing up?
Well, you asked me who's winning, and it's hard to say based on the polls, but I can tell you who's losing, and that is the 800,000 government workers who just went for the first time without a paycheck on Friday, and will miss another paycheck in a couple of weeks unless Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer and negotiate with the president to address this impasse. And so my view is nobody wins really these shutdowns, other than the people who keep political score here in Washington D.C. That's a parlor game here in Washington D.C. But unfortunately, it has pretty dramatic personal implications on a lot of people.
Visiting with U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the program. Senator, there was a story that came out in the Washington Examiner overnight talking about a so-called gang of 20. At some point, I expect to see a gang of 40. Okay, we've gone from gang of 8, now we're at gang of 20. I guess we'll see a gang of 40 at some point. You're not involved necessarily in this gang of 20. You're not part of this group, but of course, you're within leadership. You know about this group that's meeting. How much do you, know about this group, and what are they talking about? I'm hearing it's, 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans at least trying to negotiate between themselves?
That's what happens here in Washington, D.C., where we don't do things through what I would call regular order or the regular process through the committee process and on the floor. These gangs break out. And I guess to the extent that they're talking, Democrats and Republicans, and perhaps can put some pressure on their leadership, then that's a good thing. But again, Chad, if people were sincerely, the leadership like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, if they were really interested in getting to yes and to getting a compromise, and here in Washington and in life, nobody gets 100% of what they want when you're working with somebody with a different perspective and certainly on a different political party. But this is the outlines of a deal are pretty clear, but maybe this gang of 20 can help us break the impasse.
Do you see, are Republicans holding firm in yourself? I know that in the past you've not been the biggest fan of government shutdowns. Are you and other Senate Republicans holding firm behind the president on this government shutdown? We
fully support the president on this. I think he's being eminently reasonable in terms of getting the funds necessary for border security. And Senator McConnell has said he will not put a bill on the Senate floor, and he's the one who decides whether something comes to the Senate floor as majority leader. He will not put a bill on the Senate floor without the president's approval, knowing the president will sign it. And so that's where we are right now, and I hope cooler heads will prevail.
Visiting with U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. A point that the president brought up is this use of emergency powers. And there was also an idea floated by the president, I'm not sure it's gained much traction really, to use or divert disaster funds here in Texas, in Florida, in California, to fund a border wall. It seems like a lot of senators, including yourself, have come out against that idea. Has that idea kind of gone away? And what are your thoughts overall on the president using an emergency action to get a wall built?
Well, there's no question that presidents, including President Trump, have the authority under some limited circumstances to declare a national emergency and act with dispatch. Unfortunately, we got to be careful here about precedents, because we don't want a President Sanders or President Warren or President Booker or President Harris to declare a national emergency because of income disparity or some other notion. Climate change, right? So I've encouraged the president not to go down that route. In particular, as you mentioned, I think it would be a mistake to get into the disaster relief funds that we so desperately need in Texas and elsewhere in order to pay for border security. We need both. We need both those disaster relief funds that have been appropriated and sent to the state to help people recover, and we need border security. We shouldn't be robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Senator, the State of the Union address is coming up in what I believe 2 weeks now.
Right.
Do you think we're still going to have a government shutdown in 2 weeks?
Could be. Again, Chad, if you look at this through the lens of normal people, which I mean everybody outside of Washington D.C., you would see this as an eminently solvable problem, where people solve problems, every day, and we'd certainly do here in Congress on a bipartisan basis. It's just when we get into conflict like this that it becomes so visible and people become so aware of it. This is all about who wins and who loses the political games. And Nancy Pelosi is determined that she's going to defeat President Trump, and the Democrats that were elected in the midterm election, by and large, were elected on a platform of anything that the president wants, they're going to say no to, and that's how people are going to be postured leading up to the 2020 election. It's unfortunate because I think we've got some important work to do on behalf of the American people, and while the government's partially shut down, we can't do our job, and that's a shame.
Visiting with U.S. Senator John Cornyn, I want to ask you about a story that was released by the New York Times, and the president responded to it Monday. The New York Times reported that the FBI actually opened an investigation into President Trump and whether or not he was being secretly directed by the Kremlin shortly after Director James Comey was ousted from the FBI. The president has obviously denied this, said that he never worked for Russia. Democrats are apparently using this to continue this Russia probe and to continue to ask questions about the president's involvement with Vladimir Putin, with the Kremlin, with Russia. What are your overall thoughts on this? Because this seems like a movie almost.
Yeah, bad movie. I would agree with that, Chad. There's never been a time before in American history, to my knowledge, where both candidates for president were under active FBI investigations. First, of course, Hillary Clinton, where James Comey had that bizarre press conference exonerating her, only to reopen the investigation when Anthony Weiner's laptop was discovered with a bunch more of Hillary's emails in it. Just days before the election, Democrats at the time were outraged and thought that Comey had basically cost Hillary Clinton the election. And then we know that that really a bunch of rogue operators at the FBI leadership, I believe the rank-and-file FBI agents do a fantastic job, but under Director Comey, things were clearly out of control, and people with clear biases against the president opened this counterintelligence investigation against him, which only got to be more intense when the president fired James Comey, the FBI director, based on the recommendation of Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, for his clear abuse of power in the Hillary Clinton investigation, usurping the authority of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice as FBI director when he said no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute Hillary Clinton when it's clear there was evidence that could have gone to a jury, certainly a grand jury. So I think this morning, shortly, we'll have William Barr, the new nominee for Attorney General, in front of the Judiciary Committee for a hearing both today and tomorrow. And I'm going to ask him questions about that. Is that the way that the FBI and the department are supposed to operate, which appears to be overtly political and operating with bias against somebody who was ultimately elected President of the United States? Or are they supposed to act in a more nonpartisan and apolitical manner? I think I know how he'll answer the question, but I think it's important to ask.
Senator, before I let you go, I would love for you to just give an update on a bill that you have filed. You filed it once again, the National Reciprocity Act.
Well, the way I look at the National License to Carry, basically, the National Reciprocity Act, is that for people with a license to carry, like I have in Texas, to me it ought to operate like a driver's license. And that means that in other states where they recognize the license to carry, there ought to be reciprocity. So it's like a driver's license. When I travel to another jurisdiction that recognizes from a statutory basis a license to carry, then I shouldn't need to get a separate license to carry in that state. What this is basically a trap for the unwary when people are traveling across state lines. And sometimes they make a mistake and they get caught and prosecuted, and we've seen a number of instances of that. So this, to me, just seems like a common sense way to handle the concealed carry licenses, like a driver's license. People say, well, guns are dangerous, and I say to them, well, cars in the wrong hands can be dangerous too. So this is about responsible gun owners, preventing them from being caught in a trap by inadvertence, really. Well,
I wish you the best of luck on that. And then, of course, also trying to get that through the House right now. That'll be a fight, but we do wish you the best of luck on that. And, Senator, I appreciate your time today. And hopefully next time we talk to you, we'll have some border wall funding and the government will be back and running.
Let's hope so. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your time. That was U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. We'll take the break. When we come back, your phone calls and more on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM, KFYO.